All right, thanks for tuning in. This webinar series is presented by C-DEBI, and it focuses on professional development skills needed both in and out of academia. This series is typically held every other month, so stay tuned for another webinar in April. I am Stephanie Schrader, and I oversee the Education Outreach and Diversity component of C-DEBI. Before we start, I will review some webinar reminders and tips. You will be muted during the talk, so if you have a question, please use the chat box. We will answer questions as they are received, so please ask questions throughout. Today's speaker is Dr. Jason Sylvan, an assistant professor at Texas A&M College Station. He will be talking about his foray into online teaching and what he's learned. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Jason.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, so and to reiterate, I can see the chat box over here pretty clearly. So if you have questions as I'm going through this, please don't be shy and I'll answer them as I'm going. So this is a presentation called Lessons Learned, Adventures in Online Teaching and Trying to Balance Research and Teaching. And it's more or less my thoughts on my own experiences teaching in online class over the last few years, last 2 years to be exact. So I thought, what are the things that might have been useful for me to know when I started doing this, or what are the things that I've been thinking about as I've been doing it? And so the things that I'll discuss in a very loose manner are why am I telling you about this? Why teach online? So why is it something that should even be considered? Some strategies I put there for successful online teaching. I guess I just should have put for what I am doing and some people consider successful. Time commitments necessary for online teaching. Some comparisons between online and in-person teaching. So I've done both. So for those of you, I should say, that don't know me, I am an assistant professor at Texas A&M University in the Department of Oceanography. I've been here 3.5 years and actually taught for a semester also at USC. So I've been teaching for about 4 years, and a combination of in-person classes, normal classes, as well as an online class that I'm going to be telling you about. So there are definitely similarities and differences between the two approaches. So, and then probably most importantly, some examples of how I failed at balancing teaching and research, which is something that we all need to do as faculty members. Regardless of the type of university you're at, there's some balance that you're shooting for, and how hopefully you can avoid that. And then I'll wrap up kind of with, is it worth it or not? And any questions are welcome then or as we're going. So I think, let's see, why am I the one to tell you about this? Mostly because C-DEBI didn't ask anybody else. Really, it's that third thing down there. However, so you know a little background, I'm in my 4th semester of teaching an online class here at Texas A&M, which is Oceanography 251. It's Introduction to Oceanography. So this is a fairly common course at a lot of universities. It's meant to be an introduction to oceanography, mostly for a broad audience. So we do have science majors, but most of our majors, most of the students are not science majors. And this is one of these core curriculum courses where it fulfills a science class for students that are not science majors. And so that that has a big impact on kind of the level of the class, and I think how I teach it, as hopefully will come out in this presentation. Thus far, this is the third semester that I'm teaching it. I have taught 897 students. Is that right? Yeah. I'm sorry, this is 4th semester that I'm teaching it. And we'll be teaching again at the summer. So about 1,200 students taught. So you get to see a nice amount of feedback in terms of whether things are working or not at the end of the semester and even as you're going. And so that's why I'm telling you about this. Theoretically, the next slide was supposed to be a video montage I made of me teaching, and we tried to get that to incorporate into the Adobe Connect, and to spectacular failure. And so that saves 3 minutes of your life right now. However, I'm going to post the video online, and Matt will add to YouTube, and Matt will add the the website if you want to watch it, if you're watching this on YouTube at a later date. Really what I wanted to show in it, and there's a few pictures of me teaching too, so I guess it'll come out in that, is just the way that I go about presenting the particular course that I'm teaching, and the really highlighting the fact, some of the things that we talk about on this slide. And so I'll talk about this slide, and then maybe as pictures of me teaching come up later, we could discuss those things. But so the broadest question that people might have is, why teach online? We've been teaching for thousands and thousands of years in person as humans. Why are we doing this online thing nowadays? And I think in my mind, there are kind of two broad reasons. And so one of them is practical. And so some of this is, why, as you considering doing this, why should you teach online? And some of it also we should discuss is, why in general are people teaching online? But more personally, some of the things to consider is that the schedule can be really flexible. And so in my particular case, in a month from today, or ish, I'm going to sea for a month, and that's right in the middle of the semester. And so part of the reason that I'm teaching online this particular semester, and this year actually, is that when I knew that that was going to be the case, I approached my departmental chair and said, I have these teaching responsibilities. In my case, that's 3 classes a year. And I have this month-long cruise right in the middle of the semester. How are we going to handle that? And teaching online is really flexible, and so that's one of the ways that we decided that we could handle that. So teaching online, you don't have to be in class at the same time, 3 times a week or twice a week or once a week or whatever it happens to be. I should point out, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. When I'm talking about on this slide is mostly the types of online courses that are recorded and not presented live. There are also, you can teach online where you have people all over the place, but you're teaching live, and there are different considerations for that, and I'll talk about that later. But in this particular case, the class that I'm teaching was specifically designed so that it could be watched kind of at any point by students anywhere in the world that they happen to be. And so it leaves a lot of flexibility in terms of your own schedule for creating the content that needs to be posted at line. So for example, oh, somebody's calling me right in the middle of the presentation. Hey, that happened in one of my videos, and I actually answered it. This time I'm not going to. I have recorded lectures at 1 a.m., right? And if you have a crazy schedule, or if you're a night owl, or really like mornings, you can record pretty much whenever you want. Really, at the end of the day, you just have to make the content that needs to go online, but when you do that, it's totally up to you. So there's definitely something attractive about having an open schedule like that. The lecture length themselves is totally up to you. There's really one of the things that's kind of fun and that I think has made me enjoy aspects of teaching online is the fact that there's more or less no rules. I put an asterisk there. There are some good practices in terms of lecture lengths, but I've seen people vary from lectures that are in really short chunks, only a few minutes at a time, to lectures that are full 45 minutes, to some people have even longer lectures posted. And so in terms of the actual format of the course and how you present that, I think there's a lot more freedom to that than there is teaching a traditional course in person. You might be told by your colleagues that it's less work. Don't believe them. That's not the case. It's the work evens out over a long period of time in different ways than teaching in person, but it has been my experience that if you're in the part of the course where you're creating content, that you will spend on average twice as long as your colleagues kind of creating that content. The catch is that once that content is created, you can actually save a lot of time on the back end. And I'll talk a little bit about that and time management and those topics in a few slides. So those are some of the practical reasons. I mean, the other practical reason is just that we can do this now, right? In universities, part of their mission is often to reach as many people as they can, or just to reach their students wherever they happen to be. And so teaching online is the tool that allows us to do that, which wasn't available, when I was in college. But now this is something that can be done and is more and more common. I think there's another reason to consider teaching online, and that's more from an outreach perspective. And so if you think that, if you enjoy outreach, or if it's something that's important to you, something that I often think about to myself is, if I publish a paper that I think is good, maybe a few hundred people will read it, or cite it, maybe more than a few hundred people. But that's like ever, right? I'm currently, and that's just one idea that I had that a few hundred people read, maybe. If I teach this course, I'm teaching 300 non-science majors for an entire semester about the oceans. So that's like, the way I set up the class, it's different for everybody, but that's about 60 lectures and a lot of contact time, right? And those students, because they're not, most of them are not science majors, so there's a lot of business majors, there's a lot of politics, and all sorts of people that might go into in education, that might go into careers that aren't oceanographers themselves, but that make decisions that impact the ocean, right? They might go into businesses that have to do with, shipping on the ocean, or tourism that uses ships, or just things that can impact pollution, right? Or they might go into politics and think literally about marine policy. And so I think teaching this class, Introduction to Oceanography, it's the most important outreach that I really do. It lets me reach 3 times the number of students physically possible with the in-person classroom that I have. So the biggest class that my department has fits 100 students, right? And so with this online class, every semester I can teach 300 students. And so, something that, and this is all personal, but something that I really value is the ability to actually educate a large number of students about the ocean, and hopefully that leads to them making good decisions about the ocean and the environment in the future. So, more on the technical side, and this can vary quite a bit, but I thought it might be nice to have a slide that just talks about my own personal setup for doing the lectures that I produce, making them lectures, and people do them differently, but I personally, I use a digital SLR, or you could use a digital camera. It doesn't have to be an SLR. I already had one, so I will point out, like, I like cameras, and so one of the things when this opportunity came up, that I thought, oh, that's really fun. I get to make a bunch of videos. I like making videos. If you go this route where you put a camera on a tripod and you videotape yourself, don't use a lens with, like a fisheye lens or something with really wide angles, because then it's distorted. And so as much as I like artistic things, the point of these videos really, you should be able, or I think you should be able to see the board very clearly. And so I use kind of normal, I use a 35 millimeter lens most of the time. Sometimes I use a 50 millimeter, and also use f 4.0 or smaller, so larger f numbers, smaller hole, which gives you smaller opening for the light to come through, which makes the board much more in focus. That's something to consider. You don't want a situation where you have this beautiful blurry background, right? And you look wonderful, but nobody can read the slides that you're talking about. So I literally have a room that's essentially the size of a conference room, and I put the camera on a tripod facing a smartboard. You don't need to use a smartboard. I think a screen would be totally fine. It just so happens that the room that I could use, that is used very much, that I could record in at 1 a.m. Has a smartboard in it. And so I use a smartboard and I load my slides, or I bring my computer and hook it up and present it just like I would in person. However, it's on a much smaller screen. So, and I do think that it's important to have some sort of mic. I'll point out this telemarketer headset that I'm using is not what I usually use for teaching the class. Usually I use a lapel mic, which are those little mics that you put right here. They work pretty well because they're right here, so you can be heard really clearly, which is more or less the point. One thing to consider if, as part of your teaching, you want basically you want it to be obvious if you're moving around the room, like if you're not on camera, some understanding of where you are in the room, then you probably want the microphone on the camera itself. With the lapel mics, it goes with you. And so there were, some videos where I'm not on camera, but it sounds like I'm right there. So that's just something to keep in mind. But you do want some sort of mic because in camera microphones, they, as I like to say, eat a bag of poo. They're not very good. So you want the sound quality to be good because people are going to be listening to this, potentially hundreds of people. And they're not terribly expensive. Usually you can get a decent lapel mic for under $100. Get your department to buy one for you. If you really want one yourself, you could also, I guess, buy one yourself, but you should have something to make the audio sound clean. In terms of editing videos, I started out just using QuickTime, which is more or less a video that just lets you cut, time out of videos. Just to edit the first few seconds at the beginning and the end of the video. Essentially, I press play on the camera and then I walk around in the front of the camera and I start talking, and I just wanted to cut out those 5 seconds so people didn't see me walking around. And that was pretty straightforward. There was no music, there was nothing crazy, and I did that for the first year that I did this. Now I use a program called Camtasia, which I like. My department bought a license for it. If you know very much about shooting movies or making videos, you're probably rolling your eyes. However, one of the things I actually like about Camtasia is it's pretty straightforward. It lets you add music. It lets you add a few simple animations, but it's nothing, not even as nice as iMovie, and it's definitely nothing like the higher end movie making software that people use to make real movies. And I think it's all personal, but that actually helps me because, as I'll discuss, you can go down a real rabbit hole, spending way too much time editing these videos and not doing the other things that you're supposed to do related to your job. And so I like that Camtasia is pretty straightforward. It's also pretty affordable. I think our university has a license, so my individual license was less than $20. But there are other options out there. The other thing I like about Camtasia, this is really technical. However, with iMovie, the last time I have used it, maybe this is not the case anymore, but you would have to import the entire movie into iMovie to work with it, and that creates a really large file, and your computer, basically all the hard drive space in your computer, can eat up really quickly. So like one 30-minute video that I make usually is a few gigs, and then if I have to make use it in iMovie, it kind of doubles the size of that. Camtasia doesn't do that. It lets you edit from the source and then kind of export to a different source, and so I like that aspect of it. So once I've made these videos, that again, by the time you're watching this on YouTube later, you can click the link below and see what some of them look like. I post the videos on YouTube. I have them unlisted. Something to think about if you go into this is if you want your videos to be public or not. If they're public, that just means everybody can see them. There may be reasons you want that or not. You should also talk to your university and ask them if they want it public or not, right? Because they're essentially paying you to create this content. If you make it public, then it's free for everybody, which might be fine, but maybe you don't want that. And also, in general, with the internet, once things are public, they can be forever. And so if you don't want these videos to be out there forever, or you might be updating them periodically, it's something to consider. With the unlisted function, basically anybody with a link can watch it, but you can't find it in a search on YouTube. So I post the videos on YouTube because it does a good job of basically hosting them. And Texas A&M has Google licenses, so I don't know if everybody has unlimited uploads to YouTube, but it's definitely more than enough than I need in terms of the size of what I'm uploading to YouTube, and it keeps track of everything for you. But then I link them via eCampus, which is what we use here at Texas A&M. Your university might use any of the other online management, education management softwares. It doesn't really matter, but they're all fine. What I do is, I'll show you in a screenshot what that looks like, I think, in the next slide. I group my videos into folders by chapters and then include a PDF of slides and other supplementary material within those folders. And so essentially, in those folders are links to the YouTube videos so students can watch them, but you can arrange them in whatever more specific order you want in eCampus or whatever your software is. And excuse me, YouTube is more or less the holding ground for all of your videos. So what that looks like for me is this. And so this is a screenshot of our eCampus. And if you were me and you logged into this class that I'm teaching, it would look like this. And so you can see over here, it says this is the Spring 2019 Oceanography 251. Excuse me, I got the hiccups. And there's a few pages over here. And so there's a link for lecture videos and slides, which is what we're looking at here. And then there's other things like announcements. If you are teaching online, you may never meet your students, so you want to send out announcements. I try to send them out probably twice a week, and usually they're somewhere along the lines of, hey, remember me, if you're in this class, if this was an in-person class, this is where we would be right now, so you should try to be through those videos to be keeping up. And so there's another link for quizzes and exams and assignments, and actually I tend to not use most of the rest of these things. And what you can see here is if you went into the lecture videos/slides section, there's a folder for each chapter. So I have one folder called Supplemental Readings, one for an intro chapter, and then chapters 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you were to click on one of these folders, what you would see is that. And so in each folder, essentially, I apologize if it's really small, but essentially here is the PDF of the slides that I'm presenting. I think there's another picture of what this looks like on one of the other slides. But you can see here that this is the YouTube video. I think you can watch it in eCampus, or you can just click watch on YouTube, and it brings you to YouTube to watch there. And you see me standing in front of the video screen and giving my lecture. But you could also, one of the nice things with online, since time is not so much an issue, you can put more stuff for people to watch, more supplementary info. And so here I have a little PDF or a website explaining why warm air is actually less dense, which might seem counterintuitive to some students. And here's a video about Coriolis, because the way I explain it may not make sense, and so you could make links to other explanations of concepts that hopefully do make sense for the students if your own doesn't work. So, and that's how I organize this, and it's actually, for those of you who have already taught classes, it probably doesn't look too different from how you would organize a normal class, with the exception that there's links to all these videos instead of just kind of supplementary material and PDFs of your slides. Okay, so I do want to talk about kind of my approach to teaching this class. And again, this is just me, but I'm the one talking, so you have to listen to me. And so there's a few slides here called Some Strategies for Successful Online Teaching. This is part 1. And what you can see here are 4 screenshots of me teaching, and they're mostly to show you that I wear costumes when I teach to some extent. So costumes, and lots of them. I try not to repeat a shirt in any of my videos for the entire semester. I have a lot of t-shirts, so we wear a lot of different t-shirts. I have an imaginary camera person with whom I converse. His name is George. You can't have him, but you can probably invent your own. And therefore, part of this bore out of giving lectures at 1 a.m. and staring into a camera and feeling like I was going crazy and feeling like I needed to have a conversation with something. And so I invented this character, George, that I have some back and forth discussions with, and is kind of an ongoing gag throughout the semester. Every now and then you'll see from the video montage that I made, there's visits from, I have a cousin, Justin Forrest, with a fake mustache and horrible accent. Sometimes he has to give lectures for me. And sometimes I have chapter-long plot lines, and so if you look really closely, in this particular video, so this is chapter 5, video 5, and if you look closely, you can see on each of my ears is hanging 5 barrel full of monkeys. Well, in chapter 5, video 1, there was 1 barrel full of monkey, and then there were 2, and then 3, 4, 5. And so I've had a few of these kind of running gags to get the students more or less coming back. And that's how I teach my class. What you can also see here in this particular chapter, there was a storyline where the room I was teaching in was getting successively dirty, and so I was putting on kind of more and more science gear. But what you can see is you can see the setup of how I teach it, which is essentially this is the smartboard here. And I have a clicker, and I'm presenting the lectures as I would if this was an in-person class. And so essentially, my goal was to kind of recreate what it would be like for students sitting in a classroom if I was live, with the exception that they can press stop and rewind if they want to hear me say things again. And also that they can't actually ask me questions live, but they can always email me. Let's see what else I have to say about that. So I mentioned this a little earlier. I did want to put this slide aside. This whole topic of online teaching and how you approach it is very dependent on the type of course that you're teaching. And so the course that I teach, as I mentioned, is specifically designed not to be live. And that's fine. That was the design of the course. The department wanted it that way, so students can take it anytime, anywhere. The reason, when I went into this, I was a little concerned that maybe the students in the online class would be more so students that were lazy or thought it was easier when it's not actually easier. And to my surprise and delight, I found out that that's largely not the case. And a lot of the students that are taking at least the online classes here at A&M are non-traditional, which means students that have come back to school later and have jobs, and so take classes more or less at night. Or students that are of normal college age, but that work to pay for school, and so their schedules are not quite as flexible, and so having an online class helps them be able to actually go to school. So Stephanie asks, is there a typical budget your department will spend on online courses, and do they provide resources? That is a good question. So since I'm essentially recording myself in front of a screen, the budget hasn't been terribly high. Most universities, I'm pretty sure this was the case when I taught at USC, I know it's the case here, do have some budget which is typically on the order of a few, hundreds to maybe $1,000 or $2,000 kind of per course, that if you have some resource you need, that you can tap into. In my case, so I've asked for some resources in terms of microphones, and really that's it. And because I had a camera, and I have nice lenses just because I like doing that. But they have never said no. And what I would say is the success of this course partially, as well as some of the other online courses in our college, which includes meteorology, geography, and geology as well. So there's a few undergraduate as well as a few graduate level online courses. They've started investing more in online classes and recently bought like a 8-foot by 8-foot green screen setup. And I'll get to your question in a second, Myrna. So I think it's something to ask. I would say if you're asked to teach an online course, and you don't have resources to do that, your first question should be, cool, I'm maybe willing to do this. How are we going to pay for it? My department did have cameras and lenses. They have, kind of a media department. And so all of that was available to me if I needed it. So I guess to specifically answer Stephanie's question, there isn't a typical budget. But I think if you're being asked to do something that's atypical, online, I guess it's more common. I don't know if I would say it's typical yet. You shouldn't be afraid to ask for the resources that you need to do a good job, because if you do a good job, then they'll make that money back in terms of students signing up for the class and taking it. So, and Myrna asked, how do you feel questions of the lecture since we're not live? I will get to that, actually. Oh, Stephanie asks, what defines a successful online course, according to the admin? I think, so, with in-person classes, you're limited to the number of students is limited to the size of the classroom that you could secure for that particular class. With online, that's less the case. And so I think, I can only speak from our experience in this department, but I think for us, success has been essentially that when we started this, the first time we offered it, we had it open to 100 students, because that's what we normally taught in the big classrooms, the big lecture classroom, and that filled. And so then the next time we taught it, we tried 150 students, and that filled. And so now, and I should say I did 150 students without a TA. Now we're up to 300 students. I do have a TA helping me. And so I think success in this case has been defined, it's kind of twofold. I mean, A is that you have students that are signing up for the course, but B is that the reviews have been generally positive. And so the students seem to like it. So I think, as long as students kind of kept coming back, that tends to be what departments are looking for. In relation to this slide, so depending on the course you're teaching, I'm teaching this, broad non-majors course. Kind of suddenly underwritten in that is that in part of why I think they don't mind the way I teach it, being a little bit on the goofy side, is it's a competition, right? The students need to take a science course. And so we are, whether you want to admit it or not, you're competing for students to take your course. And my reason for wanting students to take my course is because I want them to learn about the ocean, but you're competing against intro astronomy and geology 101, all these other things. And so I think success is also probably defined according to having some number of students in those courses. Okay, sorry, deep breath. So in terms of the course that I'm teaching, what I found is that there's a lot of students that are non-traditional or working to pay for school. We also have, I tend to get a bunch of athletes in my classes because they have pretty intense practice schedules, and so having the flexibility of when they could take the courses helps them. And I have had at least one student taking the course in Korea, and so students. So it's not a massive open online course open to everybody in the world, but it is open to any A&M students anywhere, and so I've had students for sure overseas. Now this is all me teaching this class that's not live. If you're teaching live, online, right, but live, the options are really different. And this is going to be really successful since there's feedback live, but you need to consider things like web hosting and how to handle feedback from multiple locations. And I think I talk about that slightly in a slide coming up. So, but I guess to get back to Myrna's question of how do I feel questions at a lecture since we're not live, let's see, do I mention that here? I come to that in the next slide. Okay, so part 2 of my more serious strategies for successful online teaching. I think, for me, I think the most critical thing for me was that I sat down when I said, yes, I'll give this a try and see how it goes. I sat down and imagined what I thought would make a good class if I was taking it. And I have actually taken one online class just for fun. It was like a history of photography class, but it was essentially a college class that I just watched the videos for. And also in teaching live courses and looking for short video segments that I could use to supplement the lectures that I'm given. have watched a bunch of videos that were essentially online classes. And so you kind of formulate your opinion of what it is that you want to watch. I'll be kind of, I guess, upfront, and again, this is just my own personal opinion, but this kind of format where you have slides and a voiceover, I don't find very engaging. And so my first kind of conscious decision, which is I'm not going to do that, that I just want essentially a video of me teaching the class. But that's totally up to you. I do know people who teach it more in this format, and that can work for them, and some of those classes are quite good. I'm not personally as engaging in that setting, and so that's why I teach it the way that I teach it. I will say, so I mentioned kind of the length of the class is totally up to you. There has been a fair amount of research into this, though, and generally shorter is better. It's hard if any of you, I mean, you're watching this online. Hopefully you're able to pay attention. But if any of you have tried to be in Skype conference calls or video conference calls for more than a half hour, it starts to get challenging. I think it's hard to really pay attention on a level where you're actually trying to learn something for much longer, certainly much longer than like 40, 50 minutes. And so most of the research out there suggests shooting shorter videos. One just kind of happy coincidence for me is my video camera that I use shuts off after 30 minutes. It records 30 minutes at a time, and so that made it easy. So I just aim for 30-minute lectures and try to keep them a little bit less. But I know some people that record lectures, 5 minutes in 5-minute chunks, and all that means is just a little bit more work on the editing side, right, and keeping track of more videos than if they're longer. But that I would say you should arrange it the way that you think works best for you. And sometimes the topics dictate that. I think in 5 minutes, I could probably present 2 or 3 slides realistically, and I just don't, for me, I'm not good enough that I could really feel like that's working for me. But I think, in 30 minutes, I could get through enough of a class that it makes it worth it. I mentioned this before, but one nice thing with the online teaching is it's easy to supplement with material from YouTube or other websites without losing class time. So actually one of the things that I didn't anticipate but have found that I really love is that, in in-person classes, you tend to have to rush a little bit at the end of the semester, or perhaps drop a topic or two because inevitably, you get a discussion going, you want to cut off a good discussion in class, and you run out of time. And so you oftentimes don't have enough time to cover everything you want. In online, that's not a problem. You can just make another lecture. If I if I put together 15 slides and I said I want to do this in 30 minutes and I was only able to get through 12, that's fine. I could just record another section and add it to it. And so I actually feel like you don't want to totally overwhelm people, but I feel like I cover more material and at an easier pace than I do in person because I'm not worried about running out of time, and I really like that. And then also, I can just, since the class is online already, and so there's already the expectation that students are going online into these folders to watch the videos, that the odds are a little bit higher that if you put some supplementary material in there, like another video from YouTube, that they're more likely to actually watch that without losing class time. So I think probably most important is to be yourself. I think entertaining, well, there's different thoughts on this, but for me, entertaining while educating can go a long way with online classes. Again, part of it, depending on the class, if you're teaching a required class, kudos to you. Those people have to be there, and that's that. They're going to take the class. It'll probably make. If you're taking a class teaching a class that's not required, you're trying to keep people's attention. And so I think you don't necessarily have to dress up like a weirdo clown like I do. But you do have to admit that you have to, you do your best to be yourself and keep people's attention somehow, whether it's just by being so engaging with the material that you're presenting without necessarily making jokes, that could totally work, or if you like to keep things a little bit lighter, that can also work. But I think being yourself is really important for these classes. And then part 3 of my my strategies for quote successful online teaching. Um, and this is not specific to being online, I should say, but be available and empathetic. Even though you're not seeing the people in person, you are reaching out to them, and when you send announcements to them, they're reading them and they're interpreting that as you. And the thing that may not you may not realize at first is you don't see. So I have 300 students, and realistically, I probably interact with maybe 20 or 30 of them. More than once, more than like grading their exams. So it's like this weird kind of other that you don't necessarily meet, but they're watching you, and they really feel like they're interacting with you because they're watching 60 videos of you, right? And they're hearing you in their heads as they're reading your emails. And so it's important to be just be nice. And I always say if you don't want to teach, don't work at a university or a college. You can work other places where teaching is not required. But just because it's an online class, and this kind of goes back to Myrna's question of how you answer questions, I still hold office hours. So I'm generally, because I know people's schedules are a little weird, I hold 2 office hours a week, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, in case people can't make it, at one of those times. I also tell them I'm available via email, and if you can't make it at one of those times, send me an email, and I'll try to meet with you at a time that's more convenient, in my office. Obviously, I'm not driving around town to meet up with students. Or via video conference, right? And since it's an online class and some students might actually be overseas, I figured I should at least offer video conference availability to those out of town. And I will say I haven't been taken up on that. I have been taken up much more commonly with people that just couldn't make it during regular office hours, but they ask if they can stop by some other time. And so in terms of answering questions, generally students will email me questions based on something they saw in a video, or sometimes based on something I sent in an announcement that just went out. In my general policy, I always respond to their emails, but if somebody sends me a question that I think is good, or there are probably other people in the class that might wonder the same thing, I'll just take the question without the student's name and post it to the whole class and answer it. And so hopefully they all get the feedback. And then on the kind of unfortunate side of online teaching, I think be aware that the online environment, unfortunately, is conducive to certain forms of cheating. And so really my advice is to do your best to prevent it, but without obsessing, because you can't stop every single cheater out there, and you could drive yourself nuts trying to do so. I'm sorry. Stephanie asked, how do I deal with students when I am out to sea with limited communication? I'm going to find out. However, so one of the reasons I think I was able to do it this time is because I do have a TA. And so, with this semester's class, and I'm going to talk about this in a slide or two in terms of time commitment and making the videos and all of that. But generally, what I've been doing is kind of remaking videos once a year. And so I made the videos in the fall semester, and am still interacting with the class, but using the same videos again in the spring semester. And so I have the material I need, and so I will post. I've been posting kind of one exam's worth of material at a time, and so I'll have all of the material posted before I leave. I should have email, but I mean, at sea, you never know, and your time is not the best. And so essentially when I'm at sea, I'm going to have to lean on help from my TA. And I have that ability. If I didn't have that ability, if the class was smaller and I didn't have a TA, then I would just have to be a little bit more vigilant about making sure I could do this at sea. And actually, I should say, one of the students coming out on that cruise is actually in a class that's an online class. Their videos are already posted, and so I think she's able to complete to go to sea. She's on the flip side, in the class side, but she's able to take that class because it's online and still go to sea and do her field work. So I will say I have noticed that students online tend to ask less questions, and so that does make that aspect of it a little easier. I don't know if that's just at this university or just in my particular class, but I typically get probably like a few questions, maybe 10 questions a week, which is not a lot. It's not that difficult to handle. More approaching exams, but um, speaking of exams, getting back to cheating. So I think you just need to think about how you want to deal with that without obsessing, and admit that some of the angels at your perfect college or university do actually cheat. There are a bunch of kind of best practices for dealing with this, and a lot of it depends on the technology available to you. So like I can do essentially what eCampus allows me to do. But one of those things is to make pools of questions that are larger than what any one student will see so that no student has the same exam. And so, for instance, I usually have twice as many questions as are on the exam. And then you can program it to randomize the order of those questions as well as the order of the answers, so that even if two students are like, we're totally going to cheat on this, and they sit down next to each other to start taking it, they're not actually taking the same exam. On top of that, their exams are timed, and there's no backtracking, which is something you can set up on eCampus, and that helps. I don't like that there's no backtracking, but I tell the students this is part of the online class, and unfortunately, it's just a compromise that we have to make. And so that means, again, even if two students are right next to each other, um, it makes it just a lot harder for them to actually cheat off of each other. Uh, and you could set up banks. So even though the banks of questions, so even though the questions are randomized, every student is getting the same number of questions per chapter. So it's not, one student's not necessarily getting 50 questions from chapter 1 and another student's getting 50 from chapter 2. They're all getting the same number of questions per chapter, just slightly different questions. And also use images in your questions. It's a lot harder to do online searches to look up the answers of questions with images than it is to just copy and paste text into browsers. Some programs actually will allow you to have the browsers locked down, which means students can't open another window and do searches. This is the best, but I don't think that eCampus has that availability. It's not always possible. And I started thinking about it as like, and what if they just have a different browser app that they open? So, and actually to deal with that, my online exams are actually, they're open book. They're not allowed to copy and paste things from the internet, and you could usually tell if they've done that because it's a different font and usually worded very beautifully. But they are allowed to use open notes, and that's just an admission that how am I going to stop that? One thing that you can do, it was my personal decision not to do this, but these little cameras up here that I'm covering, you can pay, there are companies that universities can pay to watch students take an exam, and I find that horribly intrusive, but that is a way to prevent cheating because then you have somebody more or less proctoring the exam for each individual student. One thing that really bums me out, but is just a decision I had to make, is you need to consider if you want to let the students contact each other. I said no, and the reason is because we have a faculty member in our department who taught this one semester before I did. So she was actually the first person to teach teach this class online. And on her first exam, what happened was, the way we set it up, since people have crazy different schedules, is we leave the exam open for a day, or most of the day, and students can log on and take it. It's timed once they log on, but they could take it at 8 in the morning or 8 at night. And so what students were doing was they created a group from all the emails of all the other students, and they just took pictures of all the questions and then emailed them to everybody. So everybody had the questions. And that only came out kind of accidentally in a conversation with that particular professor. And so what we've done moving forward is basically shut off the ability in eCampus of students to contact each other, which bums me out because I want them to talk to each other, but that's kind of, again, another compromise we had to make. Okay, so one thing you'll hear a lot of times in relation to teaching online is like, oh, it's easy and it doesn't take a lot of time. And that might be true if you suck at it. Um, but the reality is more that it takes a lot of time to record the videos. If you can use those videos again, then you will save a lot of time that second time. And if you average it all out over 2 semesters or 3 semesters, then I would say it's probably about equivalent. But recording videos takes a really long amount of time, even if you just, get your lecture together, sit down, have an app like Adobe Connect that we're using here, and run through a presentation with a voiceover and press stop. You still have to, make sure the sound worked, which will take, just maybe a few seconds, but there's all these little things that you have to do that start to add up, and then you have to post it online and you have to create the links to it. So even a really super simple setup will take you about twice as long as teaching in person the semester that you're recording or creating the content. More important than that is that editing videos can turn into a rabbit hole of lost time if you're not careful, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But if you're the type of person that likes doing that sort of thing, you have to really be careful not to do it too much, more or less, because it's really fun. But that making, you want your videos to be good, but you can kind of go too far and end up losing all of your time making fun videos that aren't necessarily getting you grants or getting papers published. My personal opinion is that it's worth the time commitment up front if you can teach the class again and reuse the videos. The second time around, so like I'm in right now, and I did this also last year, I recorded the videos in the fall and reused them in the spring. You have all the lecture material, and you could just run the other aspects of the class, the sending out the weekly announcements, grading exams, setting them up. You could also, that gives you some time to maybe focus on, okay, I have the material, what kind of supplementary material would make this even better? Or if you decide some of the lectures just weren't as good as you want, you could re-record some of them, but you don't have to re-record necessarily all of them. And how many times you reuse the videos before re-recording, that's really up to you. I think I've talked to a bunch of people, and one common approach is kind of a rolling re-recording approach where, you record all the videos at one point, and then, the next time you teach it, you use most of the same ones, but you might, redo a few of them. And if you do that every time, over the course of a few years, you end up kind of re-recording everything, but you're not putting in that intense time commitment all at once. My feeling is I think it should probably be re-recorded every 1 to 2 years, and that's more along the lines if you teach in person, right? Every time you teach a class, you can kind of look at the materials you have and you do revise as you're going. So a lot of that is just similar, with me. So in the video that you'll see the montage of me teaching, you'll see that's over the course of 2 years. And one thing that is really obvious immediately is when I first taught it, I had short hair, and now I have long hair. And so there's some effort of, if your appearance is changing to some level, do you want the videos to look totally different? And it's fine if you do, right? But just something to consider. So some of the stuff on this slide might be obvious, but I want to put just some comparisons between online and in-person teaching. So when you're in person, obviously you can see the students right in front of you. You actually connect with the concepts, or alternatively actually falling asleep right in front of your face. Probably both of those things happening at the same time in the same class. One of the things that I miss most about teaching in person with the online class is that in person, you can gauge how well your lecture is going. Like, you see if they're falling asleep, right? But you also see if they're catching on to it. And you could make adjustments on the fly and try to re-explain something in a different way if you see a bunch of kind of puzzled looks coming at you from the audience. And you just don't get that online. And especially since they don't always ask you questions as much as I found kind of in-person students will ask questions, or or like even just coming up after class to clarify a concept, you end up not knowing until they take the exam if they understood the questions. In person, obviously, it's a set schedule that has pluses and minuses. I think it actually having a set schedule can be nice sometimes because you know exactly what you need to do that thing, and it's a little easier to stick to something if you know you have to do it, rather than to stick to something that you should be doing, but you don't necessarily have to at that moment. And as hokey as maybe it would sound, you really do get rewards interacting with real human beings on a regular basis. There is something that I can't quite put my finger on, but there's something a little mentally draining about not actually interacting with the students. And it's the type of thing that sometimes I wonder if it's good to. I, I guess I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I was only teaching online. I would really miss kind of that feedback and that energy you get working with a real class, or not a real class, with a live class. So online, you're talking to some version of a camera, whether it's your your laptop or an actual camera. But yeah, you have no idea if you're making connections with the students with the concepts until they take quizzes. The videos are static, and so you present your concept and then you move on. And so on the one hand, students can rewind and watch it again, but they're going to get that same exact explanation again. So if that explanation doesn't make sense to that particular student, they may not get that concept. And so that's a little bit of a drawback. On the flip side, they can rewind and watch it again. You could post links to other material that explains similar things. So I do this for things like Coriolis and some of the bigger concepts that I think students really need to understand, but maybe haven't seen before in my particular class. And also, YouTube actually does a surprisingly good job at captioning. So all I do is tell it what language that my video is in. So I say it's in English because that's what it's in. And I don't do anything else. And it creates captions. And there are definitely some errors. So you'll see in the video of the montage that, the class I teach is Oceanography 251, and I refer to my students as 251ers. So in the video, a lot I'm saying, hey, 251ers, blah, blah, blah. It never gets that right, but that's fine. Most of the rest of the stuff, it actually gets right to the point where I know that in some of the iterations of my class, I've had students that are hearing impaired, and I kind of wondered, like, am I going to need to do something special for them or go back and kind of re-edit some of the closed captioning? And I've never had to do that. So it's good enough, and I think that can really help students as they're going through the material, kind of, in a live lecture, if you miss something, it's gone, right? And they're on to the next thing. And so
hey Jason.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
We are coming up on the hour, so I think we might pause for a
problem.
second to see if anyone has questions, and then if you want to continue, then we can finish it up. But if people need to leave, they can.
I'm really sorry that I rambled on for so long.
So if anyone has any questions, please type them in.
Let me see how many I actually. Oh my. Oh my. So many slides. What happened? Why did nobody tell me? I see we have Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Typing. How feature-rich is the online teaching platform I use? Oh, that's a good question. It's so eCampus. eCampus really, it's more like an online assets management tool. So it essentially lets me post the videos and put them in folders, but I don't do any like editing of the videos on them. So not terribly, but again, that's totally dependent on where you are, and different campuses have different versions. And even my understanding is the version of eCampus that we have is the lower tier one, because Texas A&M, and it's a huge school. Why would we pay for the nice one? And so I know there's nicer versions of eCampus, so not so much. And it's something to consider if you're considering teaching one of these courses, is essentially how there's the creation part of the actual content, and that's more up to you, I would say. But the part of like how is this going to be hosted, and that's kind of dependent on what the school has. And Mara says, post us the rest of your slides if you have left over. Yeah, no, I totally will. I'll probably finish rambling through these. Sorry that it took so long. And this will go online, and I'm happy to give the slides to Matt. Well, I guess while people are writing, I'll go some of these other things that could be quicker. So, on the reward side of things, it actually can be rewarding if you're considering this. I've had things like I talk about bands in my videos, and I've literally had students send me videos of themselves playing songs by those bands, which was pretty amazing. You're not, since you're not talking to the students, they're like this weird mystery to you. And then if you encourage it, maybe, I do. I say, if you see me in town, please come say hello. And they do. So you get people walking up to you as you're walking around town, introducing themselves, which can be fun. Importantly, now that we're up to 300 students, it's actually created a TA position that funds a student. I mean, you get to be creative, which is, I think, fun. It's, again, that's a personal thing. So, and then I'll go real quick. So I point back to Drew Steen gave one of these seminars on, or webinars on overall work-life balance, which is kind of a different topic, but kind of within that is research and teaching balance. If you're in a faculty position, it's something you need to think about, and it varies depending on type of school and departments, but a typical ratio is like 40-40-20 teaching research service for an assistant professor, and so you have to think about how long you're spending recording these videos. And the one thing that I found is I spent probably too much time in the beginning editing these videos, and some of that is because I like camera gear and I like this sort of thing. And so my suggestion, if you go into this, is to treat it like gambling, in terms of the best way to gamble is to be like, I'm going to spend this much money, I'm happy to lose that, and I'm stopping there. And so I think if you set some amount of time that you're willing to spend on this, just try to be diligent about not going over, because if you go over, that means that's time not spent interacting with your graduate students and the postdocs in your lab, or writing papers or proposals, or all those other things that you also have to do as a professor. So, and I guess one hint to help with that is I tend to edit beginning and the ends of videos a little bit. Once I'm into the video, it's just punk rock, and if mistakes happen, I try to remember them and tell people, well, I'll put a note in the comments section, but you can spend forever reshooting videos if you go down that road. So unless something horribly wrong happens during your recording, I would say just go ahead. Let's see. So I think I've asked other students like what their versions of other classes have looked like, online classes, and I've heard everything ranging from a video of lecture slides without even a voiceover, which sounds like torture, to professors who really go over the top and do things like using Lightboard. You have to find the right balance for you. Lightboard is this thing where you're literally talking into a piece of glass, and it kind of, you can flip around, you could write on it, and it flips around. The text, so it looks like you're talking directly to the audience while you're writing, which I think can provide a deeper connection. But again, something like this is going to require some editing and post, and you have to figure out if that's the type of time you want to spend doing that, and also buying that piece of equipment, which is several $1,000s. So I think the last thing that I want to say is, is it worth it? I think it depends. I think it is, but I also know some people who tried it and it did not like it, and so it wasn't worth it for them. It really helps if you don't mind being in front of a camera. And it really helps if you can use those videos more than once, because then you'll kind of make up for some of the over amount of time that you have to put in to create them in the beginning. So, and it also probably depends on the type of course. So I think it worked really great for this, intro course, where largely I'm presenting concepts, but not getting super into, calculations or things like that. I know there's a course at A&M Corpus Christi, which is a different university in our system, but they have a graduate course that's really well liked. That's a statistics course, and it's taught online, but it's taught live with a flipped model. And that teacher put a lot of effort into creating that online course specifically for the online environment. Oh, Myrna said, did I practice being in front of the camera to avoid weird gestures, or am I just a natural? I am not a natural. And I didn't, that's a really good question. I didn't practice in terms of gestures. I decided I would mostly be myself. However, if you're going to use reuse your videos, one thing that you have to be aware of is not to talk about things like current events. And so, for example, one of the videos that I did have to record was when I first started teaching this class. Um, Hurricane Harvey had just happened, and I talked about that a lot, and it's an important topic, but then kind of realized that when students are watching that at a later semester, it might be awkward that I'm talking about something that just happened that actually happened 6 months ago. Um, so I think I'm so sorry that I talked for so long. That was not the plan, but those are my thoughts. I hope that you learned something. If you're watching this down the line and you have questions, I clearly it's a topic I can talk a lot about and have opinions and think about a lot. So if there are people that are watching this and thinking about teaching online or have questions about it, feel free to send me an email. And thank you for listening.
Yes. Thank you, Jason. That was really interesting. And yeah, so much information for
Sorry,
a venue that not a lot of
I
people have
had
used.
no idea.
All right. With that, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I will thank everyone for attending. And like I said, this will be up in a couple of days, along with some of Jason's supplemental material. Thank you.
Thank you.